Nobody inside Miller's Corner Cafe expected silence to arrive because of a single shove. The lunch crowd had been loud only seconds earlier. Farmers discussed weather forecasts, truck drivers joked over coffee, a few families waited for fresh pies cooling behind the counter. Then a heavy hand slammed into the shoulder of Isaiah Brooks. The 58-year-old black farmer stumbled forward, catching himself against an empty chair before he could hit the floor. His worn cowboy hat rolled across the wooden floor. Someone laughed. Someone else looked away. Isaiah slowly bent down and picked up his hat without saying a word. The man who had pushed him, Darren Cole, smirked as though embarrassing people was simply part of his afternoon. "I told you to mind your own business," Darren said loudly. "That girl doesn't need a broke farmer playing hero." Every eye shifted toward Emily Carter. The young waitress stood frozen beside the coffee machine, her hands shaking so badly that hot coffee splashed onto the counter. She looked no older than 23. Her face had turned pale. I'm sorry," Emily whispered. Isaiah placed his hat back on his head and calmly looked at her. "You've got nothing to apologize for." His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. That somehow made the entire room quieter. Only moments earlier, Darren had grabbed Emily's wrist after she accidentally mixed up his order. Isaiah had simply asked him to let her go. That single sentence had earned him a shove. Darren stepped closer. "You think you're some kind of saint?" Isaiah remained still. "No." "Then stay out of it." "I can't do that when someone is afraid." Several customers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Everyone in town knew Darren. He came from one of the wealthiest families in the county. His father owned construction companies. His uncle practically controlled the town council. People had learned it was easier to stay quiet than challenge him. Emily lowered her eyes. She hated herself for letting a stranger get hurt because of her. At that exact moment, the cafe door opened. A sleek black SUV had just stopped outside. 3 sharply dressed people entered first, scanning the room without saying much. Then a woman stepped inside. She wore a simple navy business suit instead of flashy designer clothes, yet confidence followed her like a shadow. Most customers didn't recognize her. The cafe owner nearly dropped a plate. He recognized her immediately. Victoria Hale, founder and billionaire CEO of Hale Harvest Foods, one of the largest agricultural companies in America. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this forgotten countryside town. She had stopped only because her meeting nearby had been delayed. She intended to order coffee and leave within 10 minutes. Instead, she walked directly into the middle of a confrontation that made the entire cafe hold its breath. Darren noticed the newcomers but didn't care. He gave Isaiah another hard shove. This time the farmer hit the edge of a table. A coffee mug shattered across the floor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Victoria watched the farmer straighten his back once again. Not once did he threaten Darren. Not once did he insult him. Instead, he quietly asked the terrified waitress one question. "Miss, are you all right?" That single sentence caught Victoria completely off guard. Most people defended themselves first. This man had just been humiliated in front of an entire cafe. Yet somehow his first concern was someone else. For reasons she couldn't explain, Victoria stopped walking. Something about the farmer's quiet dignity made her feel that she had just witnessed the beginning of a story far bigger than a simple fight inside a countryside cafe. The broken coffee mug still lay scattered across the wooden floor. No one dared to move. Emily quickly grabbed a broom, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. Before she could kneel, Isaiah gently reached for the handle. "You don't need to clean up after someone else's anger," he said. He crouched down despite the pain in his side and began picking up the larger pieces with slow, careful movements. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, sir." Isaiah gave her a small smile. "You didn't break it." Those 4 words somehow made the room even quieter. Across the cafe, Victoria Hale remained standing near the entrance. Her assistants exchanged confused glances. They had meetings scheduled, investors waiting, and a tight itinerary to follow. But Victoria wasn't looking at her watch. She was looking at Isaiah. She had spent 25 years building one of the largest agricultural companies in America. She had met politicians, celebrities, billionaires, and world leaders. Many claimed to value integrity. Very few actually lived it. This farmer had just been shoved twice, laughed at, and embarrassed in front of strangers. Yet not once had he raised his voice. Not once had he demanded sympathy. There was something unusual about him. Darren laughed loudly, breaking the silence. "Look at him," he mocked, "still acting like the good guy." He walked closer, towering over Isaiah. "You know why people like you stay poor? Because you never fight back." Isaiah slowly stood, brushing dust from his faded denim jacket. He met Darren's eyes without fear. "There's a difference," he replied calmly, "between fighting back and becoming the kind of man who enjoys hurting people." Several customers lowered their heads. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Darren's face tightened with embarrassment. "You think you're better than me?" "No. Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying every person decides what kind of name they'll leave behind." The sentence lingered in the air. Even Darren had no quick answer. Victoria found herself replaying those words in her mind. A man dressed in patched work clothes had just spoken with more conviction than most executives she dealt with every week. Behind the counter, the cafe owner, Harold Jenkins, finally stepped forward. "That's enough, Darren." Darren turned sharply. "You stay out of this, old man." Harold's expression darkened. "This is my cafe. For now," Darren answered with a smug grin. Those two words caught Victoria's attention. "For now?" Harold hesitated. Emily looked terrified. Several regular customers exchanged uneasy glances, as if they knew something Victoria didn't. Isaiah noticed it too. He looked toward Harold. "What does he mean?" Harold sighed heavily, the weight of months of stress suddenly visible on his face. "My family has owned this cafe for 42 years, he said quietly. "But if I can't pay what's due by next week—" His voice cracked. "This place won't belong to us anymore." A murmur spread across the room. Darren folded his arms with a satisfied smile. "That's right," he said. "Soon this little dump comes down. My family's development company already has plans for the land." Victoria's eyes narrowed. Something about Darren's confidence didn't feel like ordinary business. It felt personal, and for the first time since entering the cafe, she wondered whether the real story had nothing to do with a broken coffee mug, and everything to do with a scheme hiding in plain sight. Enjoying the story? Like, share, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The cafe remained unusually quiet. Darren looked around the room, expecting someone to challenge him. Nobody did. He flashed a smug smile before tossing a few bills onto the counter. "Enjoy your last week, Harold." With that, he turned and walked out, laughing as the bell above the cafe door rang behind him. Only after his truck disappeared down the country road did the customers begin talking again. Most spoke in whispers. Some shook their heads. Others simply paid their bills and left, unwilling to get involved. Victoria watched every reaction. Fear wasn't unusual in business, but this wasn't the fear of losing money. It was the fear of standing against the wrong family. She approached the counter. "Mr. Jenkins?" Harold looked up, surprised. "Yes, ma'am?" "I couldn't help overhearing. Is what that man said true?" Harold hesitated before giving a tired nod. "I'm afraid it is." He leaned against the counter as if the weight of the building rested on his shoulders. "My wife and I opened this cafe 42 years ago. We raised our daughter here. Every birthday, every Christmas, every town fundraiser happened inside these walls." Emily quietly wiped away another tear. Harold continued. "After my wife passed away 3 years ago, business slowed. Then the county announced plans for a new highway a few miles away. Most travelers stopped coming through town." Isaiah listened silently. Harold forced a weak smile. "I borrowed money to keep everyone employed. I thought things would recover, but they didn't," Victoria said. "No." He opened an old folder kept beneath the register. The loan was bought by Cole Development 6 months ago. Isaiah frowned. The same company Darren's family owns? Harold nodded. They immediately changed the repayment terms. Victoria held out her hand. May I? Harold handed her the paperwork. Years of negotiating billion-dollar contracts had trained her eyes to notice details others missed. She slowly turned each page. Then she stopped. This doesn't make sense. Harold looked confused. What do you mean? Victoria pointed to a paragraph buried deep inside the agreement. The interest rate suddenly increased after the loan changed ownership. Harold blinked. I never agreed to that. You may not have realized you did. She flipped another page. They added an amendment. When? The same week the loan was transferred. Harold rubbed his forehead. They brought me dozens of papers to sign that day. They said everything was routine. Isaiah's expression hardened. So they buried the real changes inside the paperwork. Victoria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she kept reading. Then another detail caught her attention. A very familiar legal firm's name appeared at the bottom of the page. Her own company's outside legal advisors. She froze. That law firm occasionally handled acquisitions for Hale Harvest Foods, not because she knew the case, but because she recognized their formatting. Something felt terribly wrong. Before she could speak, Emily rushed from the kitchen holding her phone. Mr. Jenkins. Her voice shook. You need to see this. She turned the screen toward them. It was security footage from 3 months earlier. The camera overlooked the cafe office. On the video, someone was quietly entering Harold's office after closing time. The image wasn't perfectly clear. But one thing was unmistakable. The man wore a jacket with the unmistakable logo of Cole Development. Isaiah stared at the screen. Victoria's expression turned cold. This no longer looked like a struggling cafe facing bad luck. It looked like someone had been planning its downfall from the very beginning. Victoria replayed the security footage 3 more times. Each viewing confirmed the same unsettling fact. The man wearing the Cole Development jacket hadn't wandered into Harold's office by accident. He had looked over both shoulders before unlocking the door with a key, disappeared inside for nearly 15 minutes, and walked out carrying nothing in his hands. Whoever he was, he had known exactly what he was doing. Harold stared at the screen in disbelief. I've never seen this before. Emily looked down, ashamed. I'm sorry. I found the file this morning while cleaning old recordings from the security system. I was going to tell you after lunch. Harold placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to apologize, Emily. If anything, this may be the first good news we've had in months. Victoria slipped her phone from her purse. My legal department can verify whether this footage has been altered. If it's authentic, it could become important. For the first time that afternoon, Darren's confidence no longer seemed unshakable. Isaiah, however, remained surprisingly calm. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't making accusations. Instead, he walked over to the shattered coffee mug he had gathered earlier and dropped the last pieces into the trash. Victoria watched him with quiet curiosity. You don't seem surprised, she said. Isaiah smiled faintly. I've farmed long enough to know something. And what's that? Weeds don't appear overnight. They grow because nobody notices them while they're small. Victoria folded her arms. So you think this has been happening for a while? I think people ignored little wrongs until they became big ones. His answer lingered in her mind. For years, she had measured success in contracts, acquisitions, and quarterly reports. Standing inside this little countryside cafe, those numbers suddenly felt meaningless. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Miss Hale. She turned toward Harold. I appreciate what you're doing, but I should tell you something. What is it? I already hired 2 lawyers. And? They both quit. Victoria frowned. They said they had conflicts of interest. Isaiah quietly replied, or someone made representing you too expensive. Harold didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence spoke for itself. Just then, the cafe door opened once again. Everyone instinctively looked up. An elderly mail carrier stepped inside carrying a stack of envelopes. "Afternoon, Harold." "Afternoon, Ben." Ben handed over the mail before noticing the tense expressions around the room. "Everything all right?" Harold forced a smile. "We've had better days." As Harold sorted through the envelopes, one thick brown package caught his attention. There was no return address, only his name written neatly across the front. He frowned. "I wasn't expecting this." Victoria exchanged a glance with Isaiah. Something about the package felt strangely deliberate. Harold carefully opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a single folded note. His hands trembled as he read the message aloud. "If you want the truth about coal development, watch the files before anyone else finds them. Trust the farmer. He's the only man in that cafe who can't be bought." The room fell silent. Every eye slowly turned toward Isaiah. He looked just as surprised as everyone else. For the first time that day, even Victoria realized this wasn't simply about saving a family cafe anymore. Someone out there already knew exactly who Isaiah Brooks was, and they believed he was the key to exposing everything. Nobody reached for the flash drive. It sat on the counter as though it carried more than digital files. The anonymous note had changed the atmosphere inside the cafe. Harold looked at Isaiah. "Do you know who could have sent this?" Isaiah slowly shook his head. "I honestly don't." Victoria studied his face carefully. She had spent years negotiating with people who lied without blinking. Isaiah wasn't one of them. His confusion was genuine. Emily brought over an old laptop the cafe used for bookkeeping. "It still works," she said nervously. Harold looked at Victoria. "Would you?" She nodded. "If this contains evidence, we need to preserve it. Nobody touches anything except me." She inserted the flash drive into the laptop. A single folder appeared. Miller's Corner Project. Inside were dozens of scanned documents, emails, financial spreadsheets, and short video clips. Victoria's expression grew more serious with every file she opened. "This wasn't put together by an amateur," she said quietly. "Someone spent months collecting this." Isaiah stepped beside her. "What does it show?" Victoria opened the first email. It revealed executives from coal development discussing the purchase of several properties surrounding the future highway exit. Miller's Corner Cafe was highlighted in red. Another message caught everyone's attention. "If Jenkins refuses to sell, pressure him through the loan. Delay negotiations until default becomes unavoidable." Emily covered her mouth. "They planned this?" Victoria nodded grimly. "It certainly looks that way." Harold sank into a chair. "So, I never had a chance." Isaiah placed a hand on his shoulder. "You always had a chance. You just didn't know the game had been rigged." The next file was even worse. A spreadsheet listed payments made to consultants, inspectors, and legal representatives. Besides, several names were handwritten notes. Delay permit approval, increase inspection frequency, create financial pressure. Victoria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "This isn't aggressive business," she said. "If these records are authentic, it's organized fraud." Then she opened the final video. The grainy security footage showed the same employee from coal development entering Harold's office months earlier, but this angle came from inside the office. The man removed several documents from Harold's filing cabinet, then he quietly replaced them with different papers. Victoria paused the video. Those were probably the loan amendments. Harold stared at the screen, in disbelief. "They switched the paperwork." "They didn't just pressure you," Victoria replied. "Someone appears to have altered the documents before you signed them." Before anyone could speak, Isaiah noticed one final file hidden at the bottom of the folder. It contained only a photograph. The picture showed Darren standing beside a smiling businessman outside a luxury hotel. Victoria's expression changed instantly. She recognized the man. Richard Coleman, one of Hale Harvest Foods' senior regional executives, the executive responsible for recommending land acquisitions in this entire region. Victoria's heartbeat quickened. Richard had personally assured her that every deal connected to the highway expansion was ethical. Now his face appeared inside an anonymous evidence package exposing what looked like a deliberate conspiracy. She slowly closed the laptop. Her voice became colder than anyone had heard all day. "If Richard Coleman is involved, she said. "This doesn't end with Darren Cole." Isaiah met her eyes. "It reaches people with far more power." Victoria gave a slow nod. "And tomorrow morning I'm going to find out exactly how high it goes." The sun had begun to set over the rolling fields when Victoria closed the laptop. Outside, the countryside looked peaceful. Inside the cafe, everyone knew peace had just become impossible. Victoria turned to Harold. "From this moment on, don't sign anything. Don't answer questions without a lawyer present. And don't tell anyone about the flash drive except the people in this room." Harold nodded. "You have my word." She looked at Isaiah next. "I have a corporate office less than an hour from here. Tomorrow morning I'm calling an emergency meeting. If anyone inside my company helped cover this up, they'll answer for it." Isaiah appreciated her determination, but his expression remained cautious. "Be careful." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm afraid of them?" "No," Isaiah replied. "I think people who have something to lose can become dangerous." Before Victoria could respond, headlights swept across the cafe windows. A black pickup truck stopped outside, then another, and another. 3 trucks. 6 men stepped out. Emily's face immediately lost its color. "They're back." The front door swung open. Darren entered with a smug grin, followed by several men wearing Cole Development work jackets. His eyes locked on Harold. "I forgot something." Harold stood his ground. "We're closed." Darren ignored him and looked around the room until his gaze settled on the laptop. "There it is." Victoria stepped between Darren and the counter. "I believe you're trespassing." Darren looked at her with a dismissive smile. "And you are Victoria Hale." The smile vanished. He had heard the name before. His confidence faltered for only a second before returning. "This is a private matter." Victoria didn't move. It stopped being private when intimidation became involved. Darren laughed. "You don't know this town." "No," Victoria answered calmly. "But I know bullies." The room fell silent again. One of Darren's men took a step toward the counter. Isaiah quietly moved in front of Emily and Harold. His stance wasn't aggressive, it was protective. Years of hard farm work had given him broad shoulders and steady balance. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't going to step aside. Darren pointed toward the laptop. "I'll take that." Isaiah spoke for the first time since Darren arrived. "No, just one word. Calm, firm, unshaken." Darren scoffed. "You think you can stop 6 men by yourself?" Isaiah looked him straight in the eye. "I think 6 men shouldn't need to threaten an old cafe if they're telling the truth." Several of Darren's own workers shifted uncomfortably. The statement hit harder than any insult. One of them quietly lowered his head. Victoria noticed. Not everyone standing behind Darren looked willing to be there. Darren, however, had already lost his patience. He reached for the laptop. Before his hand could touch it, another voice echoed from the doorway. "Don't." Everyone turned. The local sheriff stood at the entrance, accompanied by 2 deputies. Behind them was Ben, the elderly mail carrier. Ben calmly removed his cap. "I figured that anonymous package might stir up trouble," he said, "so I called the sheriff before coming back." The sheriff stepped inside and looked directly at Darren. "I've just watched enough security footage to justify asking a lot of questions." For the first time all day, Darren's confidence disappeared completely. And as Isaiah quietly exhaled, he realized the truth had finally found people willing to stand beside it. Not because of fear, but because one person had refused to surrender his dignity when everyone else stayed silent. The sheriff instructed everyone to remain where they were. One deputy collected the laptop and flash drive, placing them into evidence bags while the other escorted Darren and his men outside for questioning. Darren tried to sound confident. "This is ridiculous. You can't arrest me over old videos and anonymous files." The sheriff looked him in the eye. "Maybe not, but I can investigate them." As Darren was led outside, he glared at Isaiah. "This isn't over," Isaiah answered with the same calm voice he had used all day. "No, it isn't." Within an hour, the cafe was filled with investigators, photographers, and county officials documenting everything. Word spread through the small farming community faster than anyone expected. By sunrise the next morning, local news stations had arrived. Neighbors who had stayed silent for months finally stepped forward. One farmer admitted he had been pressured to sell his land far below its value. Another business owner revealed that surprise inspections had nearly forced his family store to close. Piece by piece, a pattern began to emerge. This had never been about one cafe. It had been about controlling the entire area before the new highway brought millions of dollars in development. Meanwhile, Victoria sat alone inside her regional office, facing the executive board of Hale Harvest Foods through a video conference. Richard Coleman appeared on the screen with his usual polished smile. "Victoria," he began, "I've heard there was an unfortunate misunderstanding in that little town." She didn't return the smile. "It wasn't a misunderstanding." Richard's expression stiffened. "I don't know what you've been told," Victoria interrupted him. "I've seen emails, financial records, security footage, and a photograph of you meeting Darren Cole while his company was manipulating local property owners." Silence filled the conference room. Richard adjusted his tie. "You should think carefully before making accusations." "I already have." She pressed a button on the conference table. Every board member received copies of the evidence. Faces around the screen changed from curiosity to disbelief. One director quietly removed his glasses. Another leaned closer to read the documents. Richard's confidence slowly faded. Victoria took a deep breath. "For years, we've claimed our company supports rural communities. If these actions happened under our name, then we don't have a public relations problem." She paused. "We have a moral failure," no one argued. By that afternoon, Richard Coleman was placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Back at the cafe, Harold watched customers fill every table. People who hadn't visited in years returned simply to show support. Emily smiled for what felt like the first time in months. She looked at Isaiah. "I don't know how to thank you." Isaiah looked around the busy cafe. "You already have. How?" "You stopped being afraid." Victoria walked over and extended her hand. "This all started because you stood up for someone you didn't even know." Isaiah shook her hand gently. "I wasn't trying to become anyone's hero." Victoria smiled. "That's exactly why you became one." Outside, more neighbors continued arriving, not because they wanted to witness a scandal, but because they wanted to stand beside a man who had reminded an entire town that dignity is strongest when it refuses to bow before power. 2 months later, Miller's Corner Cafe looked different. The faded paint had been replaced. Fresh flowers lined the front porch. The parking lot was full from sunrise until evening, not because people were curious anymore, but because they genuinely wanted the cafe to succeed. The investigation had uncovered years of corruption. Several coal development employees were charged with fraud, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Darren's father resigned from the company as more financial records surfaced. Darren himself was convicted for assault, intimidation, and his role in the scheme that targeted local business owners. Richard Coleman was dismissed from Hale Harvest Foods. An independent investigation found that he had secretly worked with coal development to manipulate land acquisitions for personal financial gain. Victoria publicly apologized on behalf of her company and announced a new rural fairness program that provided transparent contracts, free legal reviews, and financial assistance for family-owned farms and businesses. Her speech made national headlines. But when reporters asked what inspired the change, she gave a simple answer. "I met a farmer who reminded me that character is worth more than power." She never mentioned herself again. Instead, every interview focused on the people whose voices had finally been heard. One warm Saturday morning, the cafe celebrated its 43rd anniversary. Families gathered on the lawn. Children laughed while local musicians played country songs. Farmers who had once believed they were fighting alone now greeted one another like old friends. Emily had been promoted to cafe manager. Her confidence had replaced the fear that once showed in every movement. She welcomed every customer with the same kindness Isaiah had shown her on the hardest day of her life. Harold stood near the entrance, smiling at the crowd. "This place almost disappeared," he said quietly. Isaiah looked around the busy cafe. "No," he replied. "People almost forgot why it mattered." Victoria had driven back for the celebration without cameras or reporters. She sat at an ordinary table, drinking coffee and talking with neighbors, as though she had lived there for years. Before leaving, she walked over to Isaiah. "You changed more lives than you realize." Isaiah smiled beneath the brim of his old cowboy hat. "I didn't change them." He glanced around the cafe. "They changed when they stopped waiting for someone else to do the right thing." Victoria nodded, knowing he was right. As the evening sun settled over the countryside, the little cafe that had nearly been lost stood stronger than ever, not because a billionaire had saved it, but because one quiet black farmer had refused to let fear decide who he would be. His dignity inspired courage, his courage uncovered the truth, and the truth gave an entire community a second chance. True strength is not measured by money, status, or physical power. It is measured by the courage to stand for what is right, even when standing alone seems impossible. One act of quiet dignity can inspire countless others to find their own courage. If there's one lesson we can take from this story, it's this: never underestimate the impact of kindness, integrity, and moral courage. Standing up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves may not change the world overnight, but it can change a life, a community, and even the hearts of those who witness it. Sometimes the loudest victory comes from the person who never raises their voice. That's it for today. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments which part of this story touched you the most, or what lesson you learned from it. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel. See you in the next story.